and welcome to A Woman's Heart. I'm Lisa Granger. We are nearing the end of our summer reading series, and I do hope that you have enjoyed getting to know these authors and their books. I have been a fan of today's author for quite a while, and I have devoured some of her biblical fiction. But now, Tessa Afshar has written The Rested Soul, 30 Meditations to Quiet Your Heart. This was such a rich conversation that ministered to my heart, as I pray it will for you. Tessa is such a blessing with her heart for Jesus and her creativity in writing. I can't wait for you to hear about Tessa's journey and then go check out some of her books, whether it is The Rested Soul or one of her biblical fiction stories. For the show notes or the entire summer reading series, go to my website, lisagranger.com. I would love to stay connected with you. And now, relax and soak up this time with Tessa Afshar. Welcome to A Woman's Heart, and we are so incredibly blessed today. I am honored and privileged to have Tessa Afshar on the show today, and thank you so much, Tessa, for joining us.
It's a delight to be with you, Lisa, and I can't wait to start just chatting.
Yes, well, as I mentioned before, I have read many of your books, and I have thoroughly enjoyed them. You write a lot of biblical historical fiction, and then we're going to also talk about The Rested Soul, your thing. But first of all, I want everyone to have a chance to get to know you a little better. So tell us about yourself. And I usually ask for something fun that isn't normally in your bio, but you already have some really cool things in your bio. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Tessa.
Well, Lisa, I'm Tessa Afshar, and maybe the most interesting thing about my background is that I was born in the Middle East, and I lived there for maybe the first 14 years of my life. And I grew up as a nominal Muslim. And when I was 13, my parents were divorced. And so my mom and my sister and I moved to England, where I attended boarding school for girls. That's kind of interesting as well. But I survived the boarding school for girls in England. And I lived to come to the U.S., attended college here, and this is my home. I am an American citizen, and it's really something I'm very proud of, and I know that it's one of the great blessings of my life that God opened that door for me. And as far as anything fun, I suppose I can say that I am a mediocre gardener, and I love to try cooking and baking biblical recipes.
Yes, I noticed that. I was like, that is definitely different. I mean, I don't mind cooking, but I'm not bold enough to try more unique recipes like that. That would be intimidating to me.
I think it is a little bit, except for my background. So a lot of the Bible was written in the area where I was born and brought up, and that's the food that I normally eat. So sort of just pushing those boundaries a little bit. Obviously, I don't cook it the way they would have back then. Like, I don't have an oven out in the backyard or anything like that. But I try to experiment with biblical cooking for the modern cook.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So you still use the stove and the oven. You're not cooking over an open flame in the backyard.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, you mentioned that you grew up in the Middle East, and then you went to boarding school, and you grew up in a nominally Muslim family. How did you come to be a Christian?
Well, it wasn't until my mid-20s, actually. I was going through a very difficult time. And really, I think when you are young, and I'm old enough now to look back and think mid-20s is a baby. But when you are that young, there's a part of you that feels like when some cherished dream breaks apart, something on which you really built a foundation, when that falls apart, you sort of feel like you have no future. And that's really how I was feeling. I had gone through a devastating loss, and I could not see a future for myself. I felt like everything was lost. And I had no answers because during that time I hadn't heard the gospel. And so during that time I had a dream. And in that dream, I saw myself by the Sea of Galilee, and I saw a man walking toward me. And in the dream, I knew he was Jesus, and I knew he was the Son of God. And I think that's the miraculous part of the dream. And he asked me to follow him, and I did. And I want to just pull a couple of things out of the dream for someone who's listening. Maybe they need this reminder. One was that when I looked into Jesus's eyes, I saw a love the likes of which I had never experienced. And by that, I mean, I grew up in a loving family, but I had never experienced this depth and perfection of love. A love that knew me entirely and was not broken by anything that was broken in me. And at the same time, a power that I had never experienced or seen in a human being. And now, as a Christian, I know that is the power. We're told in Colossians, nothing was made that was made except through him. And that was the power that I was experiencing in that dream. And the combination, the juxtaposition of this love and this power is overwhelming. And I remember in the dream feeling like I like my knees were giving out and I was about to fall to my knees. And it always reminds me of that Philippians passage where it says every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. So in the dream, that was my experience. And when I woke up, I had 3 days of unshakable peace. I was not a Christian, however, because at the conscious level, I still had all the questions that I always had. I didn't know that religions were different. To me, Jesus was sort of on par with everybody else. And it felt like, in our family, the thing was, you be a good person, we believed in God, but just be a good person. And so it really became an issue of you. You carried your salvation. You carried the weight of your life. You carried your future. And if you were good enough, if you were smart enough, if you worked hard enough, if you were nice enough, whatever it was, it was up to you. And I didn't have any concept of my sin, any concept of God's grace. Those are not things that are active I should say God's grace is not something that is active in Islam. So I couldn't understand it. And it was shortly after the dream. And I believe even though the dream didn't make me a Christian, it kind of broke some kind of stronghold so that I was open to hear the gospel. And shortly after that, I was surrounded by Christians who then started inviting me to church. But it was really seeing them. It wasn't church. It wasn't reading the Bible. It wasn't Bible study, although they gave me a Bible and invited me to Bible study and everything. But it was seeing them and their regular lives that kept me thinking there's something different about them. My parents were divorced, but this husband and wife who were kind of, I was in the US and at the time my parents weren't there, and they became my surrogate parents. And they had such a beautiful marriage. And I kept saying, what is it about you? Because they were very different people. And my brain kept thinking, you should have a terrible marriage. My parents weren't even as different as you. And they couldn't stay together. What is it? And they kept saying, no, it's Jesus. And then finally, I thought, 99% I'm right. They're wrong. All religions are the same. But 1%, what if this Jesus? Or even 0.1%, what if Jesus is who they say he is? What am I losing here? And that's all Jesus needed to come in and change my life.
Yeah. Well, and I love that. I think the dream is beautiful. And I have heard that before. I'm like, yay. It's just beautiful. I got chill bumps when you started to tell it. And I think for me, though, also the fact that it was the people around you in their everyday lives. And it just reminds me how important that is, that we do live a little differently. I mean, we don't necessarily, there's a cliche that says being so heavenly minded we're no earthly good. I mean, we don't want to be so heavenly focused, but to just live a little differently so that people do have that. And I think that just highlights how important that is, that we live our lives, live it out, and be a little different.
I think we're not aware. Most of us who are Christians, most of us who sort of genuinely and intentionally are trying to obey the Lord and live a life that honors him, we're not aware how different our lives are. I remember one time walking into a deli. I was across from work at the time. I wasn't a full-time writer yet. And I went to the deli to order my lunch, and there's usually a line. And one person was talking to the other who was serving me, and one of them said, "She's always so peaceful." And I was like looking behind me to say, who's the she? And they were talking about me. And I was like, seriously? Like, this is what you, as a stranger looking in on me, this is what you perceive is this peace. And I realized it's not me they're seeing. It's the peace of Christ that's resting upon me. And it was drawing them. It was drawing them not to me, but it was drawing them to the Spirit whose peace was resting upon me. And there tons of examples like this in our lives. We just don't get to hear it. And to be mindful of that. We are important as Christians. We are an important witness in this world for God. Really, his church is his bride.
Yeah, and I think it draws out, too, the importance of walking out that faith in whatever profession we're doing. And you are an amazingly gifted writer, and God uses you through that. And how did that journey come about? You mentioned at this point with the deli, you weren't a full-time writer, but now you are. So tell us, how did God draw you in and kind of open it as like, oh, this is what he wants me to do?
I'm a late bloomer in almost everything in my life. So when I was younger, I knew that like writing was a thing for me. Like it was a thing. I was always drawn to it. I did it. At school, I was told that I was good at it. But I also grew up, like my dad was a radiologist. So as a physician, he was a very practical person.
Okay.
And so, I remember one day he asked me to read one of my essays for him. And he got tears in his eyes. And he's not a crying man, but he got tears in his eyes because he was so moved by this story. Wow. I was like 13. And then all of a sudden, I think he came to himself. He always was worried, I think, that this gifting would pull me away from being practical. And then I would be like, poor and have no practical skills to fall back on.
Yeah.
So he kind of pushed away the tears and he said, well, how did you do at math? So I grew up feeling like, first of all, this is not a very practical thing. It may be something I love or I'm good at, but it's not practical. And it's at best a hobby. And then when I was at the boarding school on Sundays, we would go to church and they would tell those of us who are from foreign backgrounds, go sit upstairs in the balcony and read your own holy books. Well, our holy book was the Quran. It was in Arabic. I didn't speak Arabic. And also the Quran isn't like the Bible. It's not like you don't read the Quran in the same way. Okay. The 5 tenets of Islam are different. It can be good for you if you read it in Arabic, which I couldn't. So I was like, well, this is a waste of time. But I'll read. Like, I'm not going to argue with them. I'm just like a little 14-year-old kid. So I'm just going to go sit upstairs and read romance novels. That's what I used to sneak into the church, and I would read romance novels. So suffice it to say, again, like I never heard the gospel. I was reading about love, though. I'm not sure that's what Jesus had in mind. But I fell in love with romance novels. And so I wanted to be a romance novelist. So when I was in my 20s, like early or mid 20s, I wrote 2 romance novels and I sent them in, and both of them came close to being published, especially the second one. They wrote me a letter of apology, which, by the way, if you're trying to be a writer, you'll never get that.
Oh, but I'm going to say, I've not heard of that.
I've never heard of that after either. But they apologized because it took them 6 months to write me back. And they said it's because we couldn't decide what we were going to do. Like half of us wanted to publish it and the other half felt that there wasn't enough tension between the characters. But we really like your writing. Please send us your next try. Well, in my 20s, I had a terrible wound of rejection. And I read that and all I saw was the rejection. All I saw was the no. And so the way I interpreted it was, if you can't even write a romance novel, forget it. You're not a writer.
Yeah.
But the desire would never go away because the desire was from Jesus. Like, this is how he created me. Mm-hmm. So over the years after I became a Christian, I would try writing, and, I would write maybe 30 pages, 40 pages. At some point I would stop and I would say, this is terrible. It's boring. No one will ever want to read this. I should just give up altogether. And I never finished anything. I never finished a thing. So when I was in my 40s, I was praying one New Year's Eve to commit the year to God. And I said, again to Jesus, I said, I really, really want to write. I really, really want to write books. And I had this sense in my heart finish a book this year or it will be too late. Like the timing of it was important. So I made a commitment to God. I made a commitment and I said, I will finish a book this year. And I realized, okay, the success wasn't about writing a good book. The success was that I keep my word to Jesus.
Yes.
And so I still heard those words. I still, I hadn't finished a book in 20 years. I still heard those words where this is no good. No one will ever read this. This is entirely boring. But I finished it because I gave my word to Jesus.
Yeah.
Now that went on to be my first published book, which is Pearl in the Sand, and it's won a sales award now. It's been translated into a few languages. I still hear from readers around the world who've read that book because somehow God uses that book to change hearts.
And it is a beautiful story. It's actually one of the first ones I read of yours because I was doing something on Rahab. And so I found this book and I read it and I was like, this is wonderful. I can only imagine every writer I have spoken to, whatever book they are writing, there is a lesson in the book for them from God. It's their faith inspires their writing, but then in the process of writing, God has lessons for them as well. And you mentioned healing from the wounding. What are some of the other lessons that God has taught you along the way of being a writer?
I think I can tell you the latest one that I'm working on right now in the book that I'm writing right now. And it's something that's sort of a thread that's been in my life. I deal with some chronic pain because I have chronic migraines. And so one of the things that God kind of has been slowly showing me is Jesus has been reminding me, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The pain isn't the way. So what is the way? The way is something that takes you to the destination. If you let pain be the thing that takes you to its destination, it will take you to the wrong place. If you jump on that wagon of the pain and where it wants to take you, then you're going to land in the wrong place. You have to stay in Jesus as the way and let him take you where he wants to take you, which is to strength, which is to hope, which is to trust. I am the life. So if the pain becomes your life, where your focus is so much constantly on the pain, am I going to get it? Or if I'm in it, how am I going to get rid of it? Or I'm completely focused on this pain as the most important thing in my life. Then what happens is that I'm pushing Jesus out of the way of being my life, and the pain becomes my life. It's idolatry. So I have to be mindful of that. And I am the truth. Now the pain, if whether you are in physical pain, emotional pain, whatever kind of pain you're struggling with, pain lies. Pain gives you lies that will discourage. Pain tells you lies that will diminish you, that will rob you of your identity, that will rob you of your destiny. Pain lies all the time. And so if you are listening to the pain, you are going to be completely immersed in lies, whereas you have to remain in Jesus, who is the truth. So if at any point in your life right now, there's some kind of suffering you're going through, there's some kind of experience that is emotionally, like it's been constant for a long time, or physically, or just relationally, that there's some circumstance in your life that's painful and it's been chronic, you have to be very careful and you have to ask yourself, have I made this pain the way, the truth, and the life? Because if I have, I'm committing idolatry. Like I literally had to repent and I had to say, Lord Jesus, I'm so sorry. Like you are the way, you are the truth, you are the life, and like replace things into the right order.
Yeah, no, and that is really powerful. And the idea, and you're right, I have been in chronic pain before, and it's exhausting. I just remember thinking how exhausting it was and thinking, oh, this is miserable. Lord, I don't like this at all. And it is, it's hard. And it's very easy to get discouraged and down and depressed and forget all that Jesus is the way. And I love that. And I think you write a lot of biblical fiction, as we mentioned. Your latest book that I have right now is The Rested Soul. That's a little different than what you normally write. And that was born out of some of the struggles that you had with anxiety. And can you tell us, some of that, and then how God brought you to write this book? Because it is it ministered to my heart many, many times.
I'm so glad. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, the Rested Soul was born of a battle that I had 20 years ago with anxiety, as you mentioned. It's sort of like a deeper devotional. My husband took photographs, and we looked at these kind of deep devotionals and the photos, and we thought, there'll be people who are struggling with anxiety today. They're not going to have the strength to really read that deep and go that far. So maybe all they can do is look at this photo and be encouraged, or maybe all they can do is read this short prayer or this verse or sit in this idea. And so we created this thing that was designed to be both deep and also sort of capturing you where you're at. And the reason is I know what it's like. For me, the way it started was with burnout. So about, as I said, 20 years ago, I suffered a season of burnout at work. And if you had asked me why I was so burned out, I would have told you it was just the external circumstances of my life, like the expectations that were on me and the way the job was and all of that. And some of that was true. But as I kind of walked this path out, because for me, it wasn't like praying the word of God a few times and like have someone lay hands on me and I was free. Like for me, it took more than a couple of years. So it was a process. And as I was walking that process, one of the things I learned was that actually it wasn't as external. The reason for the burnout wasn't as external. And that burnout is what led to the anxiety. But the reason wasn't as external as I thought. It was that wound that I told you about. At the root of it, that wound of sort of rejection and abandonment. So I was trying to abandon-proof my life by the way I worked. I was going to work so hard and so perfectly that I would meet every expectation, that no one would look and say, well, I've got to get someone better than this. Or no one would say, well, I'm disappointed with you. I want something else. I was abandon-proofing my life by the way I worked. And that's what was driving me. That's why my soul could not rest, because my soul was obeying the demands of the wound. At the root of my work ethics, at the root of my constant anxiety was this demand. The wound wanted to be protected. And we're not supposed to meet the expectations of a wound. We are supposed to meet the expectations of God. And one thing I really, there are a few verses in the Bible that talk about God's dissatisfaction and displeasure when we use scales that are dishonest. Yeah. And I always thought about dishonest scales in terms of business, but then I realized I'm using a dishonest scale in my own life. And so what does success look like for you, Lisa? Or you're listening to this, what does success look like for you? A success as a parent, success as a spouse, success as a friend, success in your job, success financially. How would you honestly describe success? Where do you feel like a failure? What are your scales for success like? And who is telling you what those measures are? If there's a wound at the core of that scale is going to be dishonest and someone's going to get hurt. Like in my case, what the wound was burnout that led to anxiety. And so the one getting hurt was me. But your wound may lead, for example, to anger or to jealousy. And now other people are getting wounded and hurt as well. Mm-hmm. A dishonest scale will always hurt someone. So for me, that's how it started, the journey of anxiety and walking it out with Jesus and learning the blocks to my rest. Why couldn't I have a rested soul? And learning to get rid of those blocks.
Yeah, you started talking about the scales and I remembered that one and I was like that. I remember thinking, wow, I haven't thought of dishonest scales and what am I measuring my life and my expectations against, and went, okay, this is definitely a different way of looking at that. And one of the other sections, there was a few of them that I really enjoyed, was you were talking about having anchor verses. Because when the storms come and everything else, what are those things that really anchor us to Jesus? And can you tell us a little bit about some of those anchor points and how you came up with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking that question. So essentially, my husband and I, for research, sometimes get to do some fun things. I was writing a book where the heroine woman was using a bow and arrow and archery. She was good at archery. So I needed to know, when you are practicing archery, what are the muscles that are getting sore? What parts of your body are you using? Like, I needed to be able to describe that appropriately. So we took an archery lesson. We went off and we took an archery lesson. And one of the things you won't know about me just by listening to me is that I'm very tiny. I'm only 5 feet tall. So I'm a little bit wimpy. I don't have really strong muscles.
You're power packed in a smaller package.
Amen. So when I was doing the archery, you have to hold your bow arm straight out. You're holding that bow straight out and steady, and then you keep drawing the arrow with your arrow with the other arm. After a while, though, your muscles start shaking from being tired, because you're not used to using those particular sets of muscles, and that's really bad for your aim, because when your arm is shaking, it's that arrow can go anywhere. And one thing I learned was that there's something called an anchor point. So you rest your draw fingers like on your cheek or on your neck or on your chest. For every person, it's different. You figure out what's my anchor point. And when you do that, that means there's one part of your body that is releasing the arrow that is dead steady. Right. And I realized, wow, like, I need an anchor point for my life on a daily basis. And I think when you're going through anxiety, it's really hard to create those anchor points for yourself. Like the normal anchor points of praying. You may be, if you're really anxious, you may not be able to calm down enough to be in a place to pray, or sit down and read, or, all those things, the quiet time, or focus on the Word of God. Like all the things that are like foundation of our spiritual discipleship. You may not be at a place to practice it. You need something to calm your mind. You need something, if half of you is shaking and shivering, you need something to anchor your soul. And one thing I've learned is that there are verses or even a word or even a phrase in the Word that I've learned to create into an anchor for my soul. So for me, one of those was Father, the word Father. What does that word really mean? When you study the Bible, when you read it over and over again, it gives you an idea of the fatherhood of God. Gives you an idea of, I can rest my whole weight on Him. When I say Father, that's a miracle in my mouth, that I can say to the one who created the universe, that one is my Father. Like we just throw that word out, but when you go deep into it, it has a weight to it. But that may not be the right anchor word for someone listening right now. If you had a difficult relationship with your father, another anchor word that I came up with that I really love is actually in the book of Micah, and it's a foreshadowing of the Messiah. So this verse applies to Jesus. This is who Jesus is, and this is what Jesus does at his very core. And the verse is, he who opens the breach goes up before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. So whatever wall you have, whatever block you have right now that is stealing your rest, whatever block you have to your rest, whatever block you have to your well-being, one of the core qualities of Jesus is this, that he breaks through, he breaches through the blocks in our lives that will not allow us. Like God said that, gave that promise to his people when they were in captivity and they could not set themselves free. And so wherever you are captive, whatever oppression you're experiencing, this is part of who Jesus is that he is the breaker. In one of the translations, it says he's the breaker. So for me, that word breaker, as soon as I say the word breaker, I just calm down. It's an anchor for me. Then I calm down enough to be able to sit down and say, okay, now let's pray. Now let's do business.
Yeah, no, I love that about breaking through, because sometimes I think of breaking down, but breaking down the barriers that we have, or breaking down those lies or the obstacles. And now, Tessa, what would you say to encourage someone to pursue the passion that God has placed in their heart?
Well, I will tell you that when I was going through my anxiety experience, I felt very diminished. So you may be going through something that's diminished you. Maybe it's your background. Maybe there are some lies, maybe what you're going through. I felt very diminished, and I felt like that this is it. This is my life. I'll never get past this. There's nothing beyond this. Like, I better get used to this. And this is all I can hope for. And it was such a lie, because at that time I hadn't written a single book. At that time, I hadn't even married my husband yet. There's some of the biggest, most important ways that God has used me or blessed me were not in my life. We're not in place in my life yet. And so I want you to know that right now it may look bleak. It may feel like you're diminished and there's nothing beyond this, but I don't want you to believe that lie. I want you to trust Jesus for your future, because he still has more for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Tessa, if somebody wants to get a hold of some of your books, you've got several out there, and they're all wonderful, all of the ones that I have read, and including the devotion, and you write beautiful posts on social media. What is the best way for them to connect with you?
Lisa, thanks for asking that. I think the best way is just to come on board on my website, which maybe you have spelled my name on this.
That will be in the show notes, yes.
Yeah, so it's just tessaafshar.com, and you can get to know me, get to know my books, and I would love to welcome you there. As a Middle Easterner, hospitality is really big for us. So
yes,
come over on my virtual home. Would be great.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Tessa, this has been such an amazing blessing to me. I thank you, and I know it is going to bless some other people. So we just really appreciate your taking the time in between as you're writing, as you're always writing a new one that's coming out, and we just really appreciate your coming along and spending some time with us.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thanks so much for joining me today on A Woman's Heart. I'm Lisa Granger. My heart was warmed by all that Tessa had to share. I look forward to reading more of her books this summer and beyond. If you haven't already, go to my website, lisagranger.com, for the show notes or the summer reading list. You can connect with Tessa from the show notes and learn more about her and her books. And would you share with a friend? That's the best compliment you can pay, and it doesn't cost you anything. I do believe that God has placed something precious and powerful inside every woman's heart, and our stories are worth sharing. Until next time, have a blessed day.